What's up? What's up? This Akureyri coming at you live. We got a story today from the world of Everin following Narrator Volharin, the Storm Crow. This one coming at you in about, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts, something like that. Anara and Akureyri, they're like frenemies, and then Akureyri, she comes over to Stormcrow's house, that's Anara, and then like they chop it up and, have a sit down. And the name of this tale is called Akureyri's Visit by Granger. I tell my pair of escorts to feed and water our horses over at the pond and give leave for them to mingle with the local fae who had been watching us since we passed through the standing stones of the Moonlight Grove. Before walking up the cobblestone path leading to the door of a vine-covered cottage, I could sense the sensational magic coursing through the air and ground. The scent confirmed it. As I well knew, Jasmine was out of season this time of year. Talking with the Legzerin was always an awkward affair. But the personal deal with the Sovereign of Corvets pertaining to restoring my heart grove, as well as official orders from my father necessitated meeting with her. I knocked on the door. Moments later, a furblong, a race of giant kin opened the door. "Hello," he said in a cheerful tone, and I quickly looked him up and down to assess his threat potential. As he stepped out past the threshold and closed the door halfway, it was a mortal superstition to ward against intrusion by fae that required an invitation to enter, while simultaneously extending the threshold protection of weird to those inside or at the border. He was taller than me and his skin was reddish brown like red cedar wood, so his giant ancestry probably traced to the fire giants. His shoulder-length wavy hair was green and brown, and he had a chin-strap beard. He wore a blacksmith's leather apron over brown trousers and black slip-ons with iron cups around the toes. But he did not have the look or the smell of a blacksmith. A blade song student, perhaps? I momentarily indulged a speculative thought that a Legzerin finally found someone tall enough to dance with her at the spring gala. But that idea annoyed me, and I directed my thoughts back to business. "Is this the Moonlight Grove?" I inquired. He looked around me momentarily, as if contemplating my question before nodding in the affirmative. "Yes. That's what we call it anyways in these parts. Does Legzerin Narrator still reside here?" There was another deliberate pause before he answered. "No, but she conducts her business here sometimes. Who wants to know?" I didn't know who this young man was, but if he knew a Legzerin, he should know that those who come calling for her will not often give names. Nonetheless, I smiled. "Is she here?" "I'm not sure. I just arrived here to start work a few minutes ago," he replied after another thoughtful pause. "Ah," I mused, "you're one of her employees." "I'm her assistant. If I have a name to give her and a reason for calling, if she's here, I can let her know." His smile widened as he pulled the door closed. Or, once more he paused. "Once more. I may assist you if she is not available. Please inform her that Colonel Solomar of the Red Oak Garrison is here to request assistance on behalf of the Sealy Court, and to conduct a formal business transaction." "Sure. Wait here a moment, please." He promptly went back inside and closed the door behind him. When I realized he purposefully did not introduce himself, I mentally recalled the encounter and his behavior. It occurred to me that his slow speech was probably not because he was intellectually deficient, but because he was choosing his words carefully, and my assessment of his potential threat capability increased. I heard Zinni's familiar footfalls coming up the stairs towards my lab at the doorknob turn, testing it to make sure it wasn't locked. It wasn't before opening. "Miss Anara, you have a visitor who used your fairy name." Zinni Berlin waited at the door for acknowledgement. Who is it? Please, Mr. Zinni. As I asked, I divert my attention from the boiling mixture of liquids over to my current protege. At 33 years old, Zinni was the first member of the Berlin family to be born in Spies when the family first arrived about 33 years ago. He was also the only one utterly disinterested in the family profession of horse breeding. When he was a child, he would often steal herbs, flowers, fungi, and mosses from gardens around town, including mine, and the adjacent woods, and then track me down and ask me about specific medicinal or culinary applications. When I gave him a few manuals on regional plants and minerals as a present for his 10th birthday, his interest in botany increased exponentially, and I destroyed his family's hopes that he would eventually develop an interest in horses. While that was not my intention, I still find mild amusement at the memory of his aunt Dugraf Berlin's accusation that I was purposely luring his interest away from horses. A few years ago, the Berlin family elders finally permitted him to pursue study as an apothecary with the stated expectation that he would pass on what he learned to other family members once he became a master. Despite not being overly interested in breeding horses, Zinni had a knack and desire for tending to them when they were injured, sick, or suffering from parasitic infections. He agreed, as that was his overall intention anyway. Without formally consulting me first, Zinni proceeded to inform the residents of Spies that he was my assistant, as he made himself useful in my lab. I found out 3 months later. He had also registered himself as my apothecary apprentice with Martinka Seminary when they requested a progress report. But rather than expose him as a fraud, I bound him to a weird contract requiring him to pursue medicine and serve Spies as a physician for at least 10 years. Once again, he agreed, and in doing so, the inhabitants of Spies now have 3 resident physicians to consult.
Colonel Solomar of the Red Oak Garrison requests your services on behalf of the Sealy Court,
Zinni replied.
I will inform her you aren't in.
He turned to do just that after I sigh at the mention of the name. That won't be necessary, Mr. Zinni. I point in the direction of my door where I know Akureyri is waiting for an invitation. I whisper, come in and make yourself comfortable. I'll meet with you in a few minutes. I knew Akureyri heard my greeting when I heard the main door open and close. I turned back to Zinni. Have you made a potion of fire resistance before?
No,
he said verbally, but nodded his head. It was his signal that he attempted the mixture at some point but failed. Today's your lucky day. I have the recipe written down somewhere. Here, stir this as it boils. He grabbed his parchment board and piece of graphite to take notes. And soon as he approached, I handed him my stirring stick. When the liquid turns red, add 2 spoons of asbestos powder and stir it until it turns silver gray and has the texture of sticky glue. I indicated which cover jar had the asbestos powder, then went to find one of the aforementioned notebooks. He quickly scribbled the instructions and started stirring.
How long do I have to stir it for, and does it have to be continuous?
Zinni stirred eagerly in a deliberate zigzag pattern. Don't zigzag. I stopped to correct his stirring technique. You're making a drinkable liquid, not pills. Start in the center and spiral outwards to the edge. Akureyri stepped into the lab and stopped at the far side of the table. I nod silently to her and answer Zinni's questions while I resumed looking for the desired notebook. And I quickly turned through the pages to the recipe for a fire-resistant potion once I locate it. Usually, it takes about 25 minutes to turn red and 15 minutes of stirring to change texture. I set the notebook down and pointed to the section where the potion creation steps were currently, as Zinni leaned over to look. If it doesn't change color or become sticky within 30 or so minutes, it means you did something wrong. Let me know if that happens. I'll check on you shortly. Zinni gave me a thumbs up with his left hand and proceeded to read through the recipe while stirring it. I turned to my visitor and indicate an adjacent sitting room, and casually reach into a component pouch and whisper an incantation to enable me to hear thoughts as my fingers brush against a copper coin. Colonel Akureyri Solarmar is not one of my typical visitors, and many of my childhood memories involving her are not particularly joyous, humorous, or insightful, but unpleasant, embarrassing, or upsetting. Like me, she was also born and raised in the wild lands of Fairy, but that's where our main similarities end. She was not a Ladrin, but Doin Sahi, and they have distinctly different appearance, history, and culture differentiating them from other types of elves, goblins, humans, winged folk, or elemental spirits that reside in Fairy. Our personalities, values, and our respective appearances differ as well. Starting with appearances. Akureyri was easily 2 feet shorter than me, but had well-defined and perfectly sculptured musculature and feminine proportions. Her ears and facial features were only slightly pointed, as they tended to be with Doin Sahi. She also had the Doin signature semi-metallic sheen to her faint gold-brown complexion and gold-flecked brown eyes. Once long ago, I remember she had long golden hair that curled into ringlets, but she insisted her mother cut it short to emulate her father's undercut style. She still keeps her hair cut short, although she allows some length on the top that invariably curls, but ends starkly around her ears, above her eyebrow, and 2 inches above her shoulders. But I would bet money that she uses a measuring ruler to ensure it stays the proper lengths. She was, for her, lightly armed and armored. Dusk gray leather riding gloves and a coordinating leather jerkin studded with thorns. Her mother crafted it especially for her many years ago, and it is one of her most prized possessions. Was worn over her neatly pressed red and gray blouse and trousers. Her garrison's uniform style and colors. A polished gold-hilted saber appropriately named Bagaret, menace in the Dioing dialect of Sylvan, was scabbarded and belted at her left hip, and light brown thigh-length polished boots with glittering spurs covered her feet. She was a physical embodiment of a paragon knight. At that moment, she was looking me up and down to inspect me, a habit she had developed when she was younger due to her personal responsibilities as the eldest child at Sunrise Citadel. Insofar as personally, I can unflinchingly describe Akureyri as a martinet. The notion that not everyone finds fulfillment in a hierarchical and rigidly enforced society is literally incomprehensible to her. The level of control she believes is acceptable to exert over other sentient beings is frighteningly impressive. She and I often disagreed over the past few centuries and sometimes deteriorated into physical and magical blows. While my intelligence, agility, and speed exceeds hers by far, I am no match for her strength, endurance, and athletic prowess. And that is something that I keep foremost in my thoughts whenever I interact with her, because she can descend into a violent rage that turns her into a living machine of destruction that has, unknown to her, earned her the status of an idol amongst the troll-killer Red Cap clan. Her open disdain of intellectual or artistic pursuits if they do not serve an obvious immediate utilitarian purpose, and her often high-handed presumption that everyone should and will comply with her orders grates my nerves, at least as much as my casual disregard of her demands of allegiance and obedience to the Sealy court aggravates her. But she does have some positive traits. Akureyri has a love for beauty, orderliness, and functionally coupled with a sincere desire to protect those concepts. As the prime scion of Luthier Sohalamar, Akureyri was trained and instilled with extensive knowledge and skill with arms and armament that is matched and exceeded by very few that I know of, but her dedication to improving and perfecting any physical skill she pursues is second to none. Although she has not studied blade song as I have, watching her spar is akin to watching an elaborate celebratory folk dance. When I was younger and visited the Sunrise Citadel, I would slip away unnoticed and would watch her hone her weapon skills, work with smithy tools and weapons, play stickball, cricket, or the various other chores and exercises Uncle Luthier devised for his children and squires. Her chosen skill set serves her well, since she is fearless and never hesitates to assist and defend those she considers weaker than her. And under her aegis, which is pretty much every other Sealy court-aligned being,